Let's talk about anger, not the outbursts or the yelling, but the quiet, simmering frustration you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic, talks over you in a meeting, or sends that one passive-aggressive text that seems perfectly designed to ruin your day. Now, here's a truth that might feel a little uncomfortable at first. No one can make you angry. They can provoke, they can offend, they can behave terribly, but the anger, that comes from you. It's created internally, not inserted externally. And until you understand that distinction, you'll keep giving away control of your emotional life to anyone who knows how to push your buttons. We've been taught, often subtly, that our emotions are reactions to what people do to us. Someone disrespects you, and now you're mad. Someone ignores your message, and now you're upset. But what if I told you that it's not the event that causes your anger, but the meaning you attach to it? That's the foundation of cognitive psychology, and it's echoed in nearly every major school of philosophy, from Stoicism to Buddhism. The external world doesn't control your internal state. Your interpretation of that world does. Let's break that down. Say your friend cancels on you last minute. That's a neutral event. But your brain doesn't leave it neutral. You might interpret it as, they don't value my time, or they're always unreliable, or even worse, maybe I'm not worth showing up for. Those interpretations trigger the emotional response. The anger isn't coming from the canceled plans, it's coming from the narrative you've assigned to them. That's both a tough pill and a powerful one, because once you accept that you are the author of those internal narratives, you can start rewriting them. And that's where freedom begins. Here's the deeper layer. Anger is often a secondary emotion. It's a cover, a shield. Underneath anger, there's usually something softer: hurt, fear, insecurity, disappointment. But anger feels stronger. It feels protective. So instead of saying, that hurt me, we say, I'm mad. But if you keep stopping at anger and never investigate what's underneath, you're just reacting to surface level triggers without ever healing the root. This is why two people can experience the same moment and walk away with completely different emotions. One person gets cut off in traffic and shrugs it off. Another is furious for the next hour. The difference isn't in the event, it's in the internal response. And that response is learned, conditioned, which means it can be unlearned. Now, I'm not telling you to suppress your anger. I'm telling you to understand it. Because when you understand something, you're no longer ruled by it. When you can say, oh, I'm feeling angry because I expected something different. Or, I'm frustrated because I'm interpreting this as disrespect. You start to see anger not as a justified reaction, but as useful information, a signal, a map back to your unmet needs or unspoken expectations. And here's the most empowering part. If you're the one generating your emotional response, you're also the one who can change it. That doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It means you choose your response based on your values, not your reflexes. You don't let someone's behavior dictate your inner state. You keep your power. You stay grounded. You respond with clarity, not chaos. So, the next time you feel that surge of irritation, that tightness in your chest, that spike in your tone, pause. Step back. Don't ask, what did they do to me? Ask instead, what story am I telling myself about this? And is that story helping me or hijacking me? Because when you stop giving everyone else the steering wheel to your emotions, you stop being so easily pulled into conflict, into drama, into resentment. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to prove a point. You just need to protect your peace. Here's your reflection for the road. If someone else can make you angry, they're controlling you. If you can choose how you respond, you've already won. If you really want to stop feeling angry or bothered by other people, you have to take a serious look at your ego, not in a judgmental way, but in a curious, investigative way. Because more often than not, the part of you that gets the most upset, the most offended, the most reactive, isn't really you. It's your ego trying to protect its image. Now, let's be clear, everyone has an ego. It's not inherently bad. It's the part of you that says, but I am someone. That gives you a sense of self. But left unchecked, the ego starts running the show. And when that happens, everything becomes personal. Every criticism feels like an attack. Every disagreement feels like disrespect. Every rejection feels like a statement about your worth. That's not emotional strength. That's ego fragility. And here's where this gets deeper. The ego thrives on identity. It builds a picture of who you think you are: smart, capable, respected, moral, attractive, competent. That's fine until someone comes along and challenges that image. Then the ego panics. It sees it as a threat. That's when you feel the heat rise in your chest, the urge to defend, to argue, to lash out, to prove. But what are you really defending? Is it truth, or is it just the version of yourself you've become attached to? Psychologically, the ego acts like a filter between your experiences and your responses. It decides what's acceptable and what's offensive based on its need to preserve its own identity. Philosophically, it's the barrier between you and peace. Because when you're stuck in ego, your sense of worth is fragile. It depends on external validation. It depends on being seen a certain way. And if someone doesn't give you that, if they challenge it or ignore it, you feel destabilized. But here's the shift. You are not your ego. You are the one observing the ego. You are the awareness behind it. And when you start seeing it that way, you create space between stimulus and response. You don't have to defend yourself constantly. You don't have to prove your intelligence or your value or your rightness in every conversation. You can just be. That's where strength lies. That's where peace becomes possible. One of the most liberating things you can do is detach your identity from the need to be right. So much anger, especially in arguments, comes from the belief that if I'm wrong, I lose value. But what if being wrong isn't a threat? What if it's an opportunity to learn, to evolve? Imagine the kind of mental freedom that comes from not needing to be seen as right all the time. You don't take things personally because they're not about you. They're about the other person's lens, their conditioning, their own ego. And I get it. This is easier said than done. The ego doesn't like to be quiet. It wants to jump in. It wants to react. It wants to remind you that you shouldn't be treated that way, or you're better than that comment, or they need to know they're wrong. But here's the truth. Your peace is more valuable than any temporary ego victory. Winning an argument and losing your inner calm is a terrible trade. So when someone says something rude, dismissive, or just plain ignorant, ask yourself, what part of me is reacting right now? Is it my ego or is it my values? Because if it's your ego, that reaction is optional. You don't have to take that bait. You can let it go, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, out of power. You don't need to engage with every challenge. You don't need to carry every opinion someone throws at you. People will always have thoughts about you. They'll misunderstand you. They'll project their insecurities onto you. That's life. But when you no longer see yourself as needing to manage or correct those perceptions, you become untouchable. Not in a prideful way, but in a peaceful way. Letting go of ego isn't about being passive. It's about being rooted. It's about knowing who you are so clearly that nothing anyone says can shake you. You don't get pulled into petty battles. You don't waste energy defending a version of yourself that doesn't need defending. You simply stay grounded, centered, clear, because the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest or the most right or the most respected. It's the one who doesn't need to prove anything. Here's your reminder. When you stop feeding your ego, you start feeding your peace. And that's a trade worth making every single time. If there's one habit that separates people who are chronically reactive from those who remain calm under pressure, it's this: they've learned how to pause, not suppress, not avoid. Just pause. It sounds simple, even obvious, but it's one of the hardest things to do in real time, especially when your emotions are surging and your instincts are screaming to react. Someone says something disrespectful, and your mouth wants to respond before your brain has had a chance to catch up. You read a text that hits a nerve, and you start typing a paragraph before you've taken a full breath. That's the reflex reaction without reflection. It feels automatic, but it's not. It's conditioned. And like any conditioned behavior, it can be changed. The space between stimulus and response, that's where your power lies. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said it best: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That quote isn't just poetic, it's profoundly practical. What it means is that you're not at the mercy of your emotions. You don't have to respond in the first moment you feel something. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. The person who pauses isn't avoiding conflict. They're choosing clarity over chaos. They're saying, I don't have to be dragged into every emotional reaction just because it knocks on my door. Psychologically, this is about interrupting the limbic system, your brain's emotional center, before it overrides your rational thinking. When we feel triggered, the amygdala lights up. That's the fight or flight part of your brain. It doesn't care about nuance or perspective. It's not asking, what's the best way to respond to this situation? It's asking, do I need to fight or flee? That's why you feel that surge of adrenaline when someone offends you. Your body thinks it's protecting you. But the real danger, it's not the situation, it's how you respond to it. The pause is where you move from unconscious reaction to conscious response. It's the shift from letting your biology run the show to letting your values lead the way. In that pause, you get to ask better questions. Is this worth my energy? Am I seeing this clearly? What outcome do I actually want here? Because here's the truth. Most people don't want a solution. They want to win. They want to be heard. They want to be right. That's the ego talking again. But when you pause, you cut through all of that noise. You realize you don't need to respond just because someone else was loud or rude or wrong. You get to decide what matters. You get to control the temperature of the room by controlling your own. Now let me be clear. This isn't about becoming passive or letting things slide that need to be addressed. It's about timing. It's about intention. The pause doesn't mean you don't speak up. It means when you do, it's coming from a place of stability, not instability, from direction, not defensiveness. And when you make this a practice, pausing before replying, breathing before reacting, you start to develop an internal stillness that's hard to shake. You stop being pulled into every emotional current around you. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings no longer dictate your behavior. And that is real strength. It's also incredibly practical. In your relationships, this shift changes everything. Instead of escalating arguments, you de-escalate them. Instead of saying something you'll regret, you say something that moves the conversation forward. In your work life, it allows you to lead with presence. In your personal life, it keeps you connected to what actually matters. Because you don't owe anyone a rushed response. You owe yourself the space to respond with clarity. The pause is where you stay rooted, even when the wind picks up. It's where you check in with your highest self before you answer with your lowest impulses. So the next time someone tests you, when the email feels condescending, when the tone is off, when the comment crosses a line, don't sprint toward the reaction. Just pause, take a breath. Let the emotion pass through you without letting it speak for you. Then, and only then, decide how to respond. Here's your takeaway. The pause isn't weakness. It's discipline. It's the moment where you stop being controlled and start leading yourself. If you want to live unbothered, one of the most important things you need to let go of is the illusion that you can control people. You can't. Not their behavior, not their tone, not their choices, not their reactions. You can influence, you can request, you can model, yes. But you cannot control, and the more you try to, the more frustrated, bitter, and exhausted you'll feel. The need to control others is rooted in anxiety. It's your mind trying to create certainty in an uncertain world. If they would just respect me more, listen better, talk less, do what I asked, apologize first, then I could relax. Then I wouldn't be angry. Then I'd feel safe. But notice what that framework does. It makes your peace dependent on someone else's behavior. That is a losing game, because the world doesn't work that way. People are complex. They have different values, priorities, personalities, and emotional maturity levels. Some are inconsiderate. Some are impulsive. Some are dealing with things you can't see. And if you're calm, your emotional stability depends on whether or not they get it right. You're not in control. You're waiting for someone else to hand you permission to feel okay. And here's the deeper truth. Most of the people who bother you aren't crossing boundaries. They're violating your unspoken expectations. Expectations that were never clearly communicated or that were unrealistic to begin with. You expected them to understand, to behave better, to think like you do. But they didn't. And now you're mad, not because of what happened, but because it didn't match the story in your head. That's where boundaries come in. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about protecting your peace. You don't need someone to change in order to find relief. You just need to change what you allow, what you tolerate, and where you position yourself. A real boundary isn't something you place on someone, it's something you place around yourself. You can't force someone to speak respectfully, but you can decide, if this conversation turns disrespectful, I will walk away. That's your power, and this kind of clarity changes everything, because now your peace is no longer a hostage to someone else's emotional skill set. You've stopped trying to manage their reactions, and you've started managing your own standards. You've shifted from control to clarity. This also means you need to stop over-explaining your decisions to people who benefit from you having no boundaries. You're not required to make your peace palatable. I'm not available for this kind of conversation is enough. That tone doesn't work for me is enough. No is enough. And if they get angry, if they push back, let them. Their discomfort isn't your responsibility. Your job is to protect your standard, not shrink it to avoid confrontation. Now, this doesn't mean you become cold or disconnected. In fact, it's the opposite. Real boundaries allow you to stay in relationships with more integrity because you're not building up resentment or pretending to be okay with things that drain you. You're being honest, respectful, clear. And if the relationship can't handle that kind of honesty, it probably wasn't safe to begin with. You have to get to a point where your internal standard is higher than your external need for approval. That's the shift. When someone crosses the line, you don't need to yell. You don't need to explain yourself over and over. You just reinforce the boundary and move accordingly. Calm, decisive, unshaken. Because the truth is, most of your anger doesn't come from other people. It comes from betraying your own standard over and over for the sake of avoiding discomfort. You bite your tongue when you should speak. You stay silent when you should set a line. You tolerate things you know are out of alignment with your values. And every time you do, you store that frustration in your body. Eventually, it comes out. Usually at the wrong time, usually at the wrong person. So stop asking, how do I get them to change? And start asking, what am I allowing that's out of alignment with what I value? Because once you answer that question, the path becomes clear. You don't need them to change. You just need to enforce your standards with consistency and walk away from what doesn't meet them. Here's the closing truth. The less you try to control people, the more control you gain over your life. There comes a point where you have to decide, is your peace non-negotiable, or is it still up for grabs every time someone disappoints you, misunderstands you, or disrespects you? Because if you don't make peace your standard, life and people will keep pulling you into emotional chaos you never signed up for. Not because they're malicious, but because most people are operating from their own wounds, their own distractions, their own unresolved issues. If you haven't anchored yourself in a deep commitment to protect your peace, you'll constantly find yourself reacting to their storms as if they're your responsibility to solve. You don't need to attend every conflict you're invited to. Not every comment deserves your energy. Not every offense needs a confrontation. Peace isn't found in silence or avoidance. It's found in intentionality. It's when you get to a place where you're so rooted in who you are and what matters to you that nothing external can knock you off center for long. And that's what this is really about. Being unbothered isn't about becoming numb. It's not about pretending nothing affects you. That's just avoidance in disguise. Being truly unbothered means you feel things, but you no longer follow them blindly. You're aware of the emotional response, but you've trained yourself to ask, does this deserve space in my mind? Does this align with my priorities? Or is this just noise? The moment you start building your life around peace instead of performance, everything shifts. You stop chasing people's approval. You stop trying to manage other people's opinions. You stop needing to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. And you start curating your life, not to avoid discomfort, but to reflect what actually matters to you. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. Most people live in emotional reaction mode because they've never paused long enough to decide what their internal standard actually is. They know how to react, how to defend, how to explain, but they haven't decided what peace looks like for them and what they're no longer willing to sacrifice to maintain temporary comfort or shallow connection. Think about this. When someone says something offensive, your peace gets shaken if your worth is still tied to their opinion. But when your peace is rooted in your own clarity, your values, your self-awareness, your boundaries, their words bounce off something solid. You're not shaken because you already did the inner work. You're not angry because you're no longer needing them to validate your sense of self. This doesn't mean you become passive or disengaged from life. Quite the opposite. When peace is your standard, you actually become more engaged because now your energy is focused, not scattered. You're present, not performing. You're deliberate, not defensive. And yes, choosing peace means you'll have to disappoint some people. You'll say no more often. You'll walk away from conversations that go nowhere. You'll let go of the need to be liked by everyone. That's the cost. But the payoff, you stop living like your emotions are constantly on loan to the loudest voice in the room. When peace becomes your non-negotiable, you stop arguing to be heard. You start listening to understand. You stop chasing closure. You give it to yourself. You stop fighting to keep people in your life who only stay if you lower your standards. You raise your standard and you let their absence be your answer. And here's something important. Peace isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily discipline. It's waking up and choosing not to carry the things that aren't yours to hold. Choosing not to internalize every misunderstanding. Choosing to step back instead of stepping in when the drama around you isn't aligned with the life you're trying to build. At some point, you have to make peace the filter. If it costs me my peace, it's too expensive. If it drags me into unnecessary conflict, it's not worth it. If it pulls me away from my values, it's not mine to chase, because you'll never control every situation. You'll never fix every misunderstanding. You'll never get everyone to behave the way you want them to. But you can learn to protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is.